but it is a balance sheet kind of recession. And I think things are going to get worse in the economy. There's a financial issue at the same time as you have this internal conflict.
As of January 8, 2024, the national debt in the United States has surged past an alarming $34 trillion. For many, that huge number might seem distant, almost inconceivable without context. However, digging into this seemingly enormous figure unravels a profound and upcoming danger. This massive number not only signifies a financial burden, but also casts a shadow over the destiny of our nation and the legacies of generations to come. In today's video, we explore the alarming observations of Ray Dalio, a seasoned financial expert who for over 3 years has been sounding the alarm on the critical dangers lurking within the corridors of government. Dangers that have specific consequences and look to threaten the entire financial ecosystem. Everything from stocks to real estate faces a serious threat when viewed through the prism of Dalio's warnings. Signs that have roots in a problem that started in the early 80s and are only now starting to show symptoms of trouble. Do you understand just how severe this problem is? We first need to dive into a bit of history. Debt has always been a companion of the United States since its inception. This enduring presence has led many to perceive it as a familiar and perhaps harmless aspect of our national landscape. Now, without boring you to death, I'm going to avoid going through the full history up until this point today. But what you have to understand is the key takeaway. Debt has always been woven into the fabric of this country's narrative. So naturally, you might wonder, why worry now? You see, over time, as our debt exponentially expands, we as a nation will eventually reach a point where the amount necessary to service that debt becomes too large. What I mean by this is simple. It's very easy to borrow money at favorable rates and good terms, but once the going gets rough and the interest rates increase, the burden becomes exponentially harder to pay. And we are a lot closer to that than what you probably think. Currently, the United States spends $169 billion per year on interest expenses alone, making up around 16% of our annual budget. It's estimated that in 4 years, the government will spend 2 times more money on interest than it will on our entire military. This path forward is unstable and poses a serious risk to our entire financial system. To understand the specifics and just how bad it will get, don't listen to me. Listen to Dalio. He makes it very clear just how close we are to this dangerous scenario.
Are we in a debt crisis or are we headed for one?
We are in my opinion, we are at the beginning of a very classic late big cycle debt crisis when the supply-demand gap, when you're producing too much debt and you have also a shortage of buyers. What's happening now as we have to sell all this debt is we then do have enough buyers. There are changes now in terms of the quantities in the world that are being held by large investors around the world that have lost money in these treasury bonds and so on. And then there are geopolitical changes which are having an effect. Some cases, some countries are worried about sanctions, and then there's this geopolitical shift. So when I look at the supply-demand issue, there's a supply-demand issue for that debt. There's a lot of debt. It has to be bought, has to have a high enough interest rate. So a crisis, that's, if we continue down this path in terms of what's likely over the next, 5 and 10 years, then you reach the point that balancing act becomes very difficult.
How will we know? And is it really a function of not having enough buyers for the federal debt? Is there any evidence of that so far?
We're right at the brink of starting to find out that. The amount of selling of government debt collapsed, right? We didn't issue government debt. And now we're going to issue a lot of government debt. And so when we look at the buyers, there appears to be a significant shortage of the buyers for that government debt. But we're now at the brink of being able to see what that supply-demand picture looks like as we go over the next year and two.
So you just heard Dalio there explain that the government sells its debt. What he means by this is simple. When the government needs funds to cover its expenses, such as infrastructure projects or public programs, it often turns to the financial markets to borrow money. The mechanism it uses for this is selling government debt in the form of Treasury securities. These Treasury securities are essentially promises to repay a certain amount of money with interest over a specified period. The government issues different types, such as Treasury bills, notes, and bonds, each with varying maturity dates. Investors ranging from individuals to large financial institutions and foreign governments purchase these securities. When these individuals or entities buy Treasury securities, they are lending money to the government. In return, they earn interest on their investment. This process is how the government raises capital to finance its operations without relying solely on taxation. Now, the problem Dalio is talking about is that there is less and less demand for U.S. debt instruments. Now, if there is less demand for these IOUs, it means fewer people and investors are willing to lend money to the U.S. government. And of course, this is a big deal. When there's less demand for U.S. debt, it can lead to a few challenges. First, the government might have to offer higher interest rates to attract lenders because, like any product, if fewer people want it, you might need to sweeten the deal. Secondly, if the demand for U.S. debt keeps dropping, it might become harder for the government to raise the money it needs. Imagine if you needed a loan, and fewer banks were willing to lend to you. It could make things more challenging financially. Now, let's tie it all together. As the federal government deficit grows significantly, the government is compelled to issue more debt instruments to bridge the gap between the taxes it collects and its annual spending. However, Ray Dalio's observation reveals a concerning trend: the diminishing demand for these debt instruments. When demand for these instruments drops, it triggers a critical consequence. The interest rates on these securities must rise. Considering that we are already allocating a substantial amount of funds to cover interest expenses, any further increase poses a serious threat to our economic stability. Elevating interest rates on government instruments tends to have a ripple effect, influencing interest rates across the board. If taken to an extreme, this situation can hinder economic growth, potentially leading to a recession. Now, if we go down that road and things get ugly, what you tend to have are problems that are much worse than just plain financial. Take a listen to Dalio's explanation.
Given the challenges that we face, fiscal challenges that you describe, we need a political process that will help us get out of it. Do we have that? It goes to the second issue that you always deal with, which is internal conflict.
Well, the things that you see happen over and over again when you look at history is when you have a financial not good situation. At the same time as you have large wealth gaps, you start to see the emergence of populism, and we see extremism in both of the political parties. Okay, we see that split. A populist is an individual or a leader or a political person who will win at all cost, that the rules of the game don't as much matter. And so we're in the January 6th type of incident and so on is very interesting. The political system in terms of primaries and the parties tends to create that sort of polarity. I think that I think it's very clear that there is only one good outcome, if we can, and that's a strong bipartisan middle, because either of the extremes is not going to be able to be dominant. The small right, or even the small left, and as a result, we're seeing a fragmentation. Geographically, you're seeing people move to different areas, not just because of taxes, but of differences in values and so on. And so you're seeing this separation. I think over the next 2 years, the real question is, can we have a strong bipartisan middle, or are we going to have that kind of fragmentation? We have three things aligning that are concerning. On this short-term debt cycle, I call it, the 7-year cycle, we're about halfway through. In other words, interest rates are now at a level that they're probably going to stay at, but they're probably not going to rise much from here, and there's tightness. And the consequences of that are going to be a weaker economy going forward. Doesn't have to be a big downturn because of the household sector, but it is a balance sheet kind of recession. And I think things are going to get worse in the economy. There's a financial issue at the same time as you have this internal conflict. So I think that that's going to make for a risky situation.
Now, as horrible as that sounded, it's not all bad news. In the face of growing concerns about the current trajectory of U.S. national debt, some parts of history provide us with a reassuring perspective. Consider the aftermath of the Civil War, when the national debt skyrocketed by a staggering 40 times. During that turbulent period, the United States faced unprecedented challenges, and its global position was much less significant than it is today. Despite the enormity of the challenge, the U.S. successfully navigated through that turbulent time. Bond sales, prudent fiscal policies, the commitment to redeeming currency, and economic growth played pivotal roles in maintaining stability. Fast forward to the present, and while our national debt is rising exponentially, the U.S. is far better equipped to manage the situation in the modern era. The country has a more established global standing and a diverse economy. Even if the debt were to surge dramatically, historical lessons suggest that careful financial management, coupled with measures such as bond issuance and responsible fiscal policies, can help prevent hyperinflation. The unique position of the United States in international trade is driven by the widespread use of the U.S. dollar. Due to the high demand for U.S. dollars globally, the country can maintain a situation where it imports more than it exports without experiencing a significant depreciation of its currency. This advantageous position allows the U.S. to increase the supply of dollars for various purposes, such as funding social programs, defense spending, covering interest expenses, and even providing bailouts to banks, all without causing a drastic decline in the value of the dollar compared to other currencies. According to a 2022 survey by the Bank for International Settlements, the U.S. dollar is involved in approximately 88% of global foreign exchange transactions. This percentage has remained relatively stable over the past 2 decades. This data underscores the flexibility the U.S. has in managing budget deficits, even in challenging situations. There's a considerable buffer, as many countries would be affected before the U.S. faces severe consequences. While this approach might raise ethical questions, it reflects the U.S. government's preference for having the rest of the world bear the brunt of economic challenges before reaching a point of hyperinflation. So while yes, there are points to argue, there are also those who believe them to be far-fetched and unrealistic. Wherever you stand on the issue, it's clear that some sort of reform is needed, as government spending has simply spiraled out of control. Part of the reason it has is because there haven't been any major pain points that have resulted from it in recent years. All new rules are written in blood, so it may be that a major economic fallout is what's needed to kick lawmakers into a different mindset and change the trajectory of the country. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed the video. As always, thank you for watching.